Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're going to talk about how you can create an effective abstract painting, as well as use up some old canvases that maybe just have a little too much texture on them to be painted on again. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials that I'm using, and let's get started. Today, as you can tell, I'm going to be painting on an old canvas, and it has tons and tons of texture on it. Typically, I paint over a canvas time and time again as practice, and then I end up with a lot of texture, and pretty soon I can't really even practice on it anymore because I'm not going to be able to get a very crisp line. But I hate throwing canvases away. So what we're going to do today is we're going to use some texture mediums, and we are going to take advantage of the fact that there's texture already on here, and we're going to amp that up to create our abstract painting. So I've already coated this canvas in burnt sienna because I know that that's a color that I want prominent in my painting, but you can coat it in whatever color you want. I'm going to take some gloss heavy gel and a palette knife, it doesn't matter what kind of palette knife, and just start applying it on here to get a little bit more texture or to change the texture here. Now you don't have to use gloss heavy gel, you can use any kind of texture paste or gel that you have. I like this one because to start off, it's going to be really slick and the paint's not going to absorb into it. Now notice I'm not really covering all of the canvas. I've got some little spots here where the paint is still exposed. And I like to do that because it gives me a little bit more variation. Where the paint that I'm going to apply touches the gloss, it's going to float on it for a minute because the gloss is so shiny and so slippery. But where it touches the paint, it's going to absorb into it a bit and I'll get a little bit of a different look. I just don't want a real consistent look on here. So in some places I'm applying the gel pretty heavy, and in some places I'm applying it very thin. You can do it kind of smooth like that, or you can even get in there and kind of tap it and get some weird little ribbony movements. Whatever you want to do, just have fun here and experiment with the medium to see what kind of textures you can get. Another reason I'm using gel instead of paste is because this will dry clear, and then I can still see my color that I've put underneath it. I'm going to get some high textures in here. So I'm kind of applying it thick and then rolling it like that so I get some nice ridges, because those ridges are really going to catch the paint and hold it down in there. And then when I do the embossing type effect that we're going to do, those high points will catch the color while the color in the recessed areas won't be touched. Now this does take a while to dry, and you want to make sure that you let it have the time to dry that it needs. And even though I'm using an old canvas for this, if you don't have an old canvas with texture, you can do this on a brand new canvas. I just bring up the fact that I'm using an old canvas because I get asked a lot what to do with canvases that have too much texture on them. I think I'm going to use a different gel down here. And you could certainly jump back and forth between paste and gel. There's no rule against that. I'm going to use this glass bead gel, and this stuff's really fun. It's got some little glass beads in it, and that gives a really interesting texture too. And you can even mix it in there with that first layer of gel. They're both gel based, so there's nothing wrong with mixing them together. You're going to want a lot of paper towels for this painting today. I'm just going to add a little bit more of this gloss gel here around the glass bead. All right, now I'm going to let this dry, and typically when working with gel mediums like this, especially heavy like I have it in some spots, I would say let it dry overnight. You want to wait until it's pretty much clear, but because I don't want to film a video over like 5 days long, I am going to cheat a little bit. So I'm going to let it dry until it's dry to the touch, And so you'll still see a little bit of white here and there. Okay, so you can see that this is still white, but it's dry to the touch. What you want to make sure, if you're not patient like me, and you didn't let this dry overnight, is just make sure there's not any parts that are really squishy that are going to get deformed or squish out wet medium as you start painting. And this all feels pretty good, so I think we're okay to go ahead and start. And the colors I'm going to be using are Burnt Sienna, Burnt Umber, Mars Black, and then I have some Phthalo Green and Titanium White here that I'm just going to mix up. And you don't have to use these same colors. These are colors that I really like to use in abstract paintings because it reminds me of rust or oxidized copper. And I really like that natural kind of decaying metal type look in abstract painting. So I'm gonna use my scrubbing brush and I just wet it in my jar. I'm drying it on my paper towel. What I don't want you to do when you're painting this is try and replicate what I'm doing. This is abstract art and it should be very freeform. You should make it as it comes to you. Don't try to duplicate what I'm doing. Take the things that I'm showing you and the things that I tell you and use that to create your own piece. And you don't have to use a scrubbing brush. If you want to use a flat brush and brush it all on, you could even use a sponge or a paper towel and kind of scrub it on that way. You could use your hands. You can do so much. So I'm going to start with a little bit of black, just my dark color. I'm just kind of scrubbing this on, and as you can see, as I'm scrubbing it on, you can start to see some of that texture coming through. Some of this black paint is just floating along the top of the texture. Some of it, if I scrub it really good, is getting down into the texture. And right now, all I'm doing is just getting an idea of my composition. Composition is one of the most important factors that goes into creating good abstract art. So just being random and slashing things wherever is not necessarily going to give you a good piece of art. I think that good abstract art is very intentional in the things that you do. Right now, what I'm focusing on is laying out the balance. I like to find a balance in my abstract paintings. And what I mean by balance is, and I don't know if everybody feels this way, this is just something that I think about. I think that each color has a different weight in relation to other colors. So if a color were a physical, like a weighable property, then I would say that black is the heaviest color. It weighs more than white, for example, where this brown weighs more than this brown, and both of these browns weigh more than this green, and so on. And so right now I'm just kind of laying out the weight of my painting. I'm pretty sure I want this to be the bottom, and so I'm putting black there because that feels the heaviest to me, and the heaviest would be on the bottom. But that's not to say that I couldn't flip this over afterwards and have the black be on the top. But however you need to think of it, you just want to kind of plan. You don't have to have a final product in mind, or you don't have to go into it saying it's going to look like this. But as you go, take things that you see and work with those. So as I'm looking at this side is a little bit lower. The black is a little lower than this side, and I kind of like that. I think I want this side kind of creeping up a little bit more. And that leads me to the next thing that you should be thinking about is your composition. And so the composition is how the painting is laid out. And I typically like to think about the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds says that we break our canvas up into thirds this way. So if I were to draw a line right here, I'd have 1/3 of the canvas. If I drew another line right here, I'd have another third and another third. Likewise, we can do it this way. So that's 1/3 of the canvas, that's 1/3, and that's 1/3. And so with the rule of thirds, the interesting points should be contained in one of these third areas or on the line. If you just put your interesting points smack in the center, that can be really boring. You can make that work, but typically if you just put it right in the center, it's not going to be interesting. So I'm kind of playing with my rule of thirds here. I've got the darkest area in this bottom third, and I'm taking another one up this top third, but I'm going to have it end right about at this third line. And everything I do is very deliberate, from how much paint I scrub into one area to how little paint I scrub into another. It doesn't mean that, you know, there's a right and a wrong place to scrub in a certain amount of paint. It just means that I'm making conscious decisions to put the color in different places. And I just kind of come up with that as I go along. So we'll just start with that much black. I can come back and add more later or take it away if I want. Let's go ahead and get some burnt sienna. And I know that seems kind of weird since my background is already burnt sienna, but I didn't clean off my brush. You can if you want to. I'm just going to kind of scrub it in here and let it overlap that black. Get it down into that texture a bit. So abstract painting is an expression of yourself. No one can create the abstract painting that you do. And that's why I say don't try and, you know, do your painting the way I'm doing mine. Just grab a bunch of different brushes, paint colors that you like, mediums, whatever it is, and start at it. But just be very deliberate in everything you do. So I'm still kind of building my weight here. I know I'm using the brown that I feel like is lighter than this one, weight-wise, not color-wise. But it's mixing with the black, so it's getting kind of dark. Let's go ahead and get some of this darker brown. I'm laying it on pretty heavy there. Now when I was laying down the texture in the background, I wasn't too deliberate with it. I just kind of put it on wherever. And that's okay, because that's my starting base. And as we go, we'll make changes. And I am gonna add some more texture in a little bit. Cleaned off my brush because I'm gonna jump into that green, and I want it to be fairly true to the color that I mixed. Now another thing that I think makes a good abstract painting versus a not as good one is creating a flow for the viewer. So what I like to do is kind of plan out how I want the viewer's eye to move through the painting. So I'm going to grab some of my green, and I'm going to start kind of up in this area. Really work it into there. And so what I mean by a flow is I want to direct how the viewer looks at the painting. So I might bring some of this green kind of down. Maybe I'll take some of it down here into this darker area and around a bit. Let it play off of that texture that I laid down. So now you see I've got this movement of this green like that. Well, I don't want the viewer to just start there and end there. I want to bring them down through here, have them look at all of this texture, somehow bring them back up over to this side, back down, so that they're constantly in this flow rather than I saw it, I'm done. So I'm just gonna kind of take the green up through there. I don't know exactly how I'm gonna pull from here back up into here just yet, but I'm not worried about that because I know I'll figure that out. See how that texture is really starting to show in all of these areas. So as you're going and you notice little things that you like, I want you to stop and really try and work on bringing those out. So right here, I have this distinct bumpy area from the glass bead and another one here, and then it's kind of flat through here. And to me, that looks really pleasing and almost river-like. And I accidentally, without even planning on it, took the green right into that area, and I really like that. So I think I want to work on that and try and keep that green pretty tight in that area. And I'm using different amounts of pressure, super light pressure to kind of dust the color out, or just run it along the top edge of some of this texture, like here. And I can put heavier pressure if I really want to dig it deep down into that texture. I'm gonna get some more of this burnt umber because I love the way the burnt umber and the aqua mix together. You get a really nice greenish color, like a oxidized copper type color, and I really like that. So even though you can't really see that brown there, it's just giving me that hint of color there. So we've all heard people say, when looking at a piece of abstract art, I could do that. And maybe you've even said that before. I'm sure I've said it before, and that's unfortunate. But, you know, unless you've tried abstract art before, you really don't know what it takes to get good abstract art. And I think a lot of people who have tried doing abstract art before understand that it's not as easy as it looks. It's not just randomly throwing paint onto a canvas and saying that that's expressive. You know, I think that there has to be some deliberate intent there before it can be good art. So I'm just going to keep on working these base colors in. This is just my first layer of color. And then we'll start working on some other fun things. Just remember, let some of it get deep down in those textures and let some of it just kind of float across the top edge. So I'm using like really light pressure right there. And see how it kind of places the paint on the ridges, but it leaves that bright green. And the more layers you add, the more time you spend on this and add layer upon layer upon layer of color and texture, the more interesting and rich and dynamic it's going to be. One thing I absolutely don't want you to do while painting like this is think, oh, I ruined it, I've destroyed it, this is awful, because you're not painting something specific. So nobody can say whether or not you messed it up or ruined it. Just keep messing with it. You could absolutely keep painting on this forever and ever and ever until you get it exactly how you want it. You know, add more texture to it or add another color to cover it up. But don't get frustrated and stop, because this is your abstract painting. It can be however you want it to be. So I'm really just kind of floating this color over top of the other colors. So I'm using really light pressure. Notice it's not getting down in those divots, but it's really showing the texture more. It's helping amp that up a bit. I'm gonna float some of that over top of these little beads here. because I've decided now that I don't want this corner quite as dark. I'm gonna have this be my dark corner, and that will contrast nicely to this corner, which kind of helps draw the eye up and through. So in last week's video, when we did the stormy seaside, I told you to stand back a lot and look at your painting. Don't make decisions based on what you see standing right here. Stand back and look at it. And certainly with abstract, you can make some decisions right here, but I still encourage you to stand back, get away from the painting and look and see what little elements you see. What areas do you want to be darker? What areas are insinuating that they're already lighter? Things like that. That's what I want you to do. So standing back and looking at it, I can tell I want a nice bright spot right here. And I know this is pretty much the center, but we've got a lot going on in the third areas that are gonna kind of help cut the eye through that and onto something else. So I have a little bit of pure white, and I'm just gonna grab a bit of it, and I'm gonna start working on that. If I know I want this brighter, then I'm going to start working on that right now. Another thing that makes abstract really interesting is if you get differences in your paint. So what I mean is where I've got this all really fogged out, if I add some areas where the white or any other color is really heavy and has a stark line between it and the next color, that's going to help draw the eye there too and be really interesting. So this is all about experimenting and seeing what happens and changing your mind and doing something else. But again, I can't stress it enough, it's all deliberate. It's not just taking a bunch of paint and randomly slashing it onto the canvas. Now, certainly you can make good abstract art like that. I don't mean to say that anybody who just slaps paint onto a canvas without thinking about it isn't making good art at all. But I think you're more likely to be successful if you're more deliberate with it. And I actually don't like that line in there just yet. So any of you who are card makers or scrapbookers, you've probably done some embossing before, and that's kind of what I'm doing here, where I'm just lightly wiping the paint over top of the texture. Okay, so now I kind of feel like I don't have any ideas about where to go with this next, and that's normal. You'll reach a point where you kind of look at it and you're like, what should I do next? And when that happens, then I want you to walk away from it. Don't try and force something to happen, just walk away from it. Don't look at it for a few minutes. Maybe take a photo with your phone. And after about 10 minutes or so, look at the photo on your phone, and you'll be able to see little areas that you want to emphasize or remove, then come back to it. So I'm gonna walk away from this for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and continue on. So as I was standing back and looking at this, I decided it was time to start adding a little bit more texture and start bringing back some of this burnt sienna that I've lost a little bit, start deepening some of these shadows, and then I can start really working on popping out the parts that I want to be really bright. So I'm gonna take this modeling paste. This paste is fairly absorbent, especially compared to the gel, and it's gonna dry exactly this color. So what I'm gonna do is decide where I want a little bit more of that burnt sienna to come out or where I wanna change the texture. And I'm gonna start laying this down. And this dries a lot faster than the gel. So I'm kind of laying this right up against those beads and even over top of them a little. So the beads are still there, but now their texture has changed just a little bit. So I'm gonna get out my dryer and just make sure that this is all dry before we continue. So I'm gonna go back to my burnt sienna, and now is where we're really gonna see some layers start to happen. Because right now we really only have, one color layered over top of another color. But the more layers you add, like I said before, the more dynamicism you're gonna see in these colors. So this medium that I just put down is a lot more absorbent, so it's taking a little bit more work to get the paint to lay down on it, which is one of the reasons I chose not to use it for my base layer. Now you can certainly use this for your base layer. I just think it's wise to know what a medium does before really committing to it. So just remember that pastes are typically more absorbent than gels. And gels, the paint will just kind of float on top of it, where the paste, it will kind of absorb down into it a bit more. So everything that I just covered in paste, I'm going to cover in my burnt sienna. Because I don't want this painting to be all dark except for the green and white. I want to keep some of that rusty brightness in there too. And when you're choosing colors for an abstract, you can certainly just pick random colors if you like, but I think that you probably will be a little bit more successful, and you'll probably like what you come out with better more often if you choose your colors. And I like to choose colors that contrast in some way, but really work well together. Like these colors, like I said, it reminds me of rust or oxidized copper. And so that's why I chose these colors. But you could choose, completely contrasting colors, so blues and oranges or yellows and purples. You could pick analog colors, which are colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. So think like purple, red, orange. That would be an analog color set. That would look really interesting. Or you could even go monochromatic, just black and white, or purple and white, or black and yellow, whatever you want to do. But put a little bit of thought into the colors that you pick. And see now where I've got the burnt sienna, the aqua, and then the burnt sienna again, we're starting to see some good layering, and those colors are kind of meshing together more than just laying on top of each other. But if you want your colors to just be laying on top of each other, you can do that too. There's not a right and a wrong way to do abstract. So I don't want you to think that anything that I'm saying here is how it's done. You can do it however you want. Experiment with different mediums while you're doing this. If you're using very light colors, let's say you're using white and maybe some pinks and lavenders, some very light colors, you still want some of the contrast in there, so a little bit of black or a super dark blue, something is going to help set that off and give you that contrast. But maybe you don't necessarily need to do that with paint. Maybe you can do it with a crayon. If you take a crayon and run it over this texture, it's gonna grab that crayon and pull it in. Or use a charcoal pencil or you know, anything. Throw a little bit of watercolor on top of it or something. Or embed a piece of paper into the canvas with some of the texture medium. See how when I'm using this color super thin, it glows through and it shows the other color underneath it. And then we get that color transition that's really, really fun. I used to paint like this a lot. Almost every day I would come out with a new abstract painting similar to this in that it had a lot of texture, and you know, I use these colors a lot actually when I do abstract painting. And then I kind of got out of it when I started doing videos for you guys because I figured, oh, they don't want to see abstract painting constantly. And then I just never got around to doing an abstract painting video. So I'm really excited to be doing this one today. It's been a long time since I've painted like this, and it kind of feels like returning to my art roots. Ooh, see, I found that interesting texture that kind of came across and down. And so just kind of embossing over top of it, I kept seeing it move, so I went with that and kind of followed it. That's what I mean about being deliberate, not just all over the place, because then you lose little interesting things that might just happen like that. It almost looks like veins or tree branches or roots or something. I know a lot of people don't like abstract paintings because, you know, they look at it and they think, oh, I don't get it. Doesn't mean anything to me, I just don't get it. But I think, for me anyway, the fun part about abstract art is interpreting it however you want. This part I thought was a little too green, so I'm just embossing over the texture. I'll still have a bit of that green, but I'm really kicking it back quite a bit with this burnt sienna, sorry. So I challenge you that if you're one of those people who doesn't appreciate abstract art, you think that it's just, you know, messy and doesn't mean anything, or it confuses you. And I know that there's even people who, you know, if they don't understand it, they feel dumb and they don't want to look at it. But abstract art is meant to be interpreted. If you have no idea what the artist intended to say when they were painting it, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You are the viewer, and it means to you what it means to you. You know, if you look at it and the colors or the textures make you angry, or they make you feel energized, or you just like it, that's a perfectly okay response. I don't know why, I just like it. That's okay. You don't have to come out with, you know, some big explanation about, you know, this says something about the duality of man, or it's a commentary on our current political climate. You don't have to come out with anything like that. If something like that happens to resonate with you, and those are the things that you think about, that's okay too. Personally, I never ask an artist what a piece means to them, what their interpretation of it is, what they were thinking when they created it, because I don't really care. I know that sounds kind of rude, but like I said, art is very personal. And if a painting resonates with me and I love something about it, and if I were to ask the artist what it means to them, and what it means to them absolutely doesn't resonate with me, or it's completely against, you know, how I feel, whatever, then it might ruin the painting for me, and then I no longer appreciate that painting. So I never ask. I just take it for what it means to me. And you are more than welcome to do that too. Okay, so I've got some more of that burnt sienna back in, and I'm happier with that. I did kind of emboss into these textures a bit because I don't want anything to be real stark and stand out in a solid color. So even these areas that I just did, they're very solid right now, but I'm not gonna leave them like that. In fact, I'm gonna grab a little bit of burnt umber and start kind of embossing in these areas now. So what I was saying about, you know, interpreting a painting however you like. There's a painting that I bought from an artist friend of mine recently, and I felt like it was a really moving painting. I really love this painting, and you know, it makes me feel a certain way when I look at it. I didn't know when I bought it that on the back of the painting there's a little envelope, and in that envelope is a story that describes what the painting is about. Another friend of mine read the story and told me not to read it because, first of all, she knows that I like to interpret art the way I want to interpret it, but she also knew that I probably wouldn't like the painting anymore if I read what was in the envelope on the back, the story that goes with it. So I've never read it, and I never will. I have absolutely no intention of reading it because I don't want the painting to be ruined for me. And as an artist yourself, on the flip side to that, you should never tell anybody that they're wrong for interpreting one of your paintings a way that's different from you. You know, if I paint something and someone says, wow, that makes me feel really sad, and to me, it's a very happy painting, I don't tell them that. I let them feel it however they want to feel it. Because their feelings when viewing the painting are just as valid as mine were while creating it. So see how I just took a little bit of that burnt umber and I really kind of focused on getting it down into the texture as well as lightly floating it across the top. And that really helps to set those layers apart again rather than just having the solid burnt sienna kind of like we have up in this area. We've got a little bit more depth there. And I am using my paint a little thicker now. Before I was kind of scrubbing it out until it was gone. I'm working with the contrast and textures of the paint now. You know, I'm going from really thin paint to thicker paint, from a lighter, more transparent layer of color to a more solid block of color. Just remember, always contrast. So if you're painting something with a lot of circles, let's say, so similar to the Circle and Squares painting by Kandinsky, he's got a lot of circles, and at first, if you just kind of glance at it, you think it's an abstract painting full of circles. But the interesting thing is that he's got all of the circles contained in squares, which would be kind of a contrasting shape to the circles. And so that creates a bit of interest. The colors that he uses are alternating and they kind of flow from one layer to the next within each circle. They're all different, but they all use the same colors. And so, you know, you might look at it and think, wow, that's a really simple painting. I could do that. But to come up with something like that, you know, to keep the viewer interested in a bunch of circles contained in squares, it was a very deliberate thing that he did. But that's just to point out, you know, the contrast. You want contrasting shapes as well as colors and textures. You could also take your painting like this, and when you're done, draw a very solid, very sharp black line down one side. That would help give you that contrast as well. I think up in this corner, well, up in this top center area, I'm gonna go pretty dark right here. Because right now I've got this area that's dark and this area is pretty dark, but things are kind of more interesting when they're in odd numbers. So if I have a dark area here and a dark area here and a dark area here, that will keep the viewer's eye. The dark areas tend to kind of keep you contained into a painting. So these are kind of like the entry points. This one especially, it's bright and it goes off of the canvas. So this will draw you down and in, and we've got this interesting little area with a lot of texture and movement, but it's contained between two dark areas. So it doesn't shoot off to the bottom of the canvas. You've looked at it and you're done. It brings you in here, kind of bounces you off of this dark corner, and will bring you back up into here. So you want to think about where your dark areas are too. If your dark area is just kind of smack in the center, that's going to push the viewer around to the outside, which then lets them go off of the canvas. And then they might lose interest and they're done looking at it after a second. So try and keep, I think anyway, and this is just how I interpret it and how I paint it. You know, everybody's different, but that's kind of the things that I focus on, is how can I keep the viewer contained in the painting? And I feel like for me anyway, I'm more likely to stay looking at a painting if the dark colors contain the lighter colors and keep me moving around inside of it. I'm gonna go back to some black. Get a good amount of dark up here, but try not to lose all of that texture. Just kind of floating it again. Because if it's just solid black, that's going to be boring. And look at that, when I drag that black just over top of the texture there. Now that green, even though I've painted over a lot of it, that green really pops now because the high points are very dark. I'm not going to do quite as much over here, just a bit. I'm going to kind of let this ridge here that I've created trap the black. So the black kind of stops at that ridge. I'm going to add a little bit more paste and just kind of keep working these just like I have. I feel like I've lost a little bit of my green that I wanted to keep, and that everything is getting just overall a little too dark. So that's, like I said, there's not a way that you can ruin this. You get too much of something and you don't like it, just take it away. Add something over top of it. And I'm going to use this paste to get back a little of the green I lost. But also I had the green just a little bit too centered for my taste. It's not exactly centered, it's a little higher, but I want to bring it up just a little bit more. So that's why I'm applying the paste a little higher. All right, I'm going to just float a little bit of this color over top of the texture here because I kind of lost some of my green and I don't want to lose all of it. I want my green to be the color that you're most attracted to in the painting. And if it's just really contained into these small areas, it's going to feel very squished. And I don't want it to feel real squished. So I'm just going to kind of play with this green a bit. I'm not worried about the white part. It is dry, but I'm going to do something different with that. I'm going to wait until after I do this. Float a little bit of that out there, a bit heavier. All right, now I'm going to take some gloss medium or glazing medium, and I'm going to mix it in with my aqua color quite a bit because I want this to be fairly thin. I got a little extra water on my brush. My brush was pretty dry, so I just got a tiny bit, and I don't want anywhere near that much paint. So I'm going to start just by getting it onto this paste that I just put on. And then where it gets off of the paste, I'm just kind of smearing it with my finger so that it's nice and foggy. So whatever mediums you have, matte medium, glazing medium, crackle paste, anything, I want you to experiment with them and see how you can use them all together. Right up here where it comes in contact with that dark area, I'm really doing my best not to get it off of this paste because I like the contrast between that bright aqua, the hard edge, with the dark right behind it. All right, so I got some of my green back. Now I'm just gonna throw you into super time lapse and I'm gonna go through and just keep layering a bit on these ridges and kind of pushing and pulling shadows. And then I think I know the last thing I wanna do to really give this that last pop that I feel like it needs. So when I get to that point, we'll come back and I'll show you. All right, now I am honestly pretty happy with the way this looks, but I really could probably go over this for hours and hours and hours and keep changing it and layering it. So don't be afraid to do that. One more thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my flat brush, I wet it in my jar and I just barely wiped it off, so there's still quite a bit of water in here. I'm gonna come over to my white and mix all of that water in my brush in with the white. Here's another little bit of contrasting shapes and textures of paint that we're gonna do, that I'm gonna do. You don't have to do this. When I was standing back and looking at it a while ago, I kind of saw this and thought, I'm gonna remember that, I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna pick up quite a bit of this, and my hands are about to get really messy. I'm gonna hold it toward this center area and just kind of give it a flick. Kind of dab it in there a bit. Get a bit more. I have a ton of paint in this brush. It is very, very loaded up. And then I think maybe I'll try it this way too. Just hit it against another brush. Maybe I'll do one right in here too, just a little bit. I think I like that. I think I'm done. Now before you sign it, you can flip it into different orientations and see what you like better. So this is the direction that I painted it in. That's on one side, upside down, and on the other side. And a lot of times when I do these, I end up liking them in a different orientation than what I painted it in. But this one, I really feel like I like it that way. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign it. And there's just one of a trillion ways that you can paint an abstract painting. I hope you learned a lot from this video. And remember, the things that I want you to take away from this when you're painting abstract is to do everything with a purpose. Be very mindful while you're painting. Focus on your color choices, as well as composition, and creating an interesting flow that keeps the viewer in the painting. I would love to see what abstract paintings you come up with. Make sure you check out the video description below for links to where you can find me on the internet and share your work with me. If you haven't yet already, please make sure you subscribe. You can do so by clicking here. If you'd like to keep painting with me today, check out these 2 videos that I've picked just for you. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.